but not all of us have the same inner workings. And a lot of us have great big blocks, whether those are religious or cultural, or whether they're trauma related. We have these big blocks in our way that stop us from being able to freely experience ourselves as sexual beings and then freely sharing that with the people that we wish to partner with. That's big work to do. And it's really exciting, but you have to open yourself up to it.
Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turns multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to another episode of the Suburban Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Pfeiffer, back again this week with another amazing suburban warrior here to share her story and expertise with you. And I'm really excited about this episode. I think it's going to be a really good one. So let me introduce to you Dr. Joli Hamilton. She is the relationship coach for couples who color outside the lines. She is a research psychologist, TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and AASECT certified sex educator. Joli also co-hosts the Playing with Fire podcast with her anchor partner, Ken. Joli's been featured in the New York Times, NPR, Cosmo, and Vogue. She spent the past 2 decades studying and reimagining what love can be if we open our imaginations to possibility. She helps people create non-monogamous partnerships that are custom built for their authentic selves. No more shrinking, pretending, or hiding required. Welcome to the podcast, Joli.
Thank you so much for having me, Chrissy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here. First of all, I think it's very apropos that we are recording this podcast on Valentine's Day.
Well, we sure are.
I know. Of course, it'll launch in a couple of weeks, but I love that we're talking all things love and sex on Valentine's Day. So let's just get right into it. Tell my listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, one of the things that everyone loves knowing about me is how much I love the word love, right? I love the word love. It's awesome. I studied love because I messed it up a lot, though. Like a lot. I have loved badly. I have loved poorly. I have really, really screwed up a lot of relationships. And then I studied my way out of it. So a little bit about me, I have a plethora of psychology degrees. I have gone through the ringer of learning how to do relationships well, but also I have 7 kids, which that means I have had to figure out how to do this while being busy and being feeling tapped out, right? Like how you feel tapped out when you're living a life of a person who is, trying to take care of your parents and trying to raise your children and trying to go to school and trying to run a business. So one of the things that I'm guessing your listeners could resonate with is how do you have like a relationship you actually want and do all the other things? How do you live your full life while also doing the other things?
Oh, yeah. I think that's something, that many, many people struggle with. Especially, I think my listeners, because most of my listeners are, women probably between the ages of like 35 and 60, right? So we're in the thick of it when it comes to life transitions, with kids, with career, and just, with physical changes with our bodies, trying to figure it all out, marriages, divorces, friends coming and going, you name it. Right. Yeah. So I agree. I think it's, an evolution of always trying to figure out how do we balance it all? How do we do it all? What does this look like? Am I doing it right? These big questions that I think we ask ourselves all the time as women, especially women in mid-age.
Yeah. These are our middle years or one of my favorite books is called The Middle Passage by Jim Hollis. And I think we're in this long passage. It's not like you hit a specific year and you experience, oh, I am now middle-aged. It's no, we're just in the middle of what it is to be an adult. And it goes on for a long time, ideally. Not all of us are given the gift of aging. Right. I want it to go on for a while, and I'm hoping to live quite a long time, and I'm hoping to live it well. But that means that relationships, for me, they make or break whether I feel like I'm living well. And I wasn't given a lot of skills to do them well. And as it turns out, I am polyamorous. So I fall in love with more than one person at a time. I wound up focusing my work on people who wanted non-monogamy because there are a lot of people out there who want something a little bit beyond the typical scope of monogamy, but they don't know what to do. I found myself in that position. And then there are other people, and I'm guessing even more of your listeners will resonate with this, who are like living their life, going along, and a partner presents this as an idea. And they have to wrestle with like, wait a minute, I already have a full plate and you want me to do what now?
Yeah.
I just don't know whether I can handle all of this. So I make my life and living, my research is in jealousy, and my world is about helping people do relationships beautifully, no matter how many partners they have. And when you want more than one partner, it does get more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about that. So you're a relationship coach for those couples who want to color outside the lines. How did you even evolve into realizing like that's what you were going to focus on? Was it, again, I get because your own preference of being polyamorous?
Yeah. So I woke up one day and realized that there was a word polyamory, but when I look back in my life, I've always fallen in love with multiple people, but I followed the script. So yeah. I have found that most of my clients and most of the people who I interview on my own podcast or who have questions about this, they don't know what they don't know. Non-monogamy is the kind of thing that once it enters into your brain that this can be done well and negotiated well, you can't not know it. But until you don't know that, you can be blissfully unaware or you can be miserably unaware. I was in the miserably unaware. I didn't know that it was possible to have a consensual, negotiated non-monogamy. So I lived monogamously and I behaved and I did the things I was supposed to do, but I was also not comfortable. So I wound up focusing on this in my research because I knew I wasn't alone. The research, in fact, tells us that 20% of people in the United States will try non-monogamy at some point. 5% are living non-monogamously, consensually negotiated at any one time. That's a lot of people. Like 20% is the same number of people as who have cats. We all know somebody who is doing this or has done it. So for me, it's about making sure that everyone has the tools and methods and resources that they need in order to do it well, because it's also possible, of course, to do it really badly. Then they've done that too.
So let me ask you this, because obviously, like you said, we all know people with cats, but like, we don't really all know people that are polyamorous, or maybe
we don't think so.
Exactly. That's where I was going with this. Like, or maybe we do, right? So let's even talk about what that even means to be polyamorous. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it can look like a lot of different things. So when I hear somebody describe that they are in an open relationship or a non-monogamous relationship, or they're polyamorous, there are so many different words that they might use. They might use the words ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy, or they might say, hey, we swing a little bit. All of these are they fit under the larger umbrella of non-monogamy. And I need to ask the person, what does that mean for you? How does that work for you? But let's face it. Anything that is outside of the mainstream is stigmatized. If something is stigmatized, then people tend not to acknowledge it. And real talk, there is discrimination against people who live against the mainstream story. And it is a very clear mainstream story that monogamy is not just the norm, but it is the only acceptable way to love and to live. So what I find now is most of my clients, even though they are thriving and loving their non-monogamous experience, most of them are what they would have to categorize as socially monogamous. They don't tell their friends, they don't tell their parents, they don't tell their colleagues because they're afraid. And that is a really unfortunate circumstance because I think most of us would say that they want to know, we want to know our friends. We want to support our colleagues. We want to be open-minded and we want to understand that just because someone else is living a certain way doesn't mean that we can't love them and accept them and embrace them. But again, if we don't know, then we don't create a safe environment for people to express like, hey, I actually have more than one partner. So we do things like we accidentally block people from even being able to express this. Like, have you ever heard of anybody sending a wedding invitation with more than a +1? Like, we don't do that, right? We don't say
exactly.
like, are you bringing your partner or partners? We just say +1. So it's built into the cultural milieu. And it's an interesting time right now because at the same time, I mean, look, we've got TV shows, we've got storylines all over the place. We've got, just in the last week, we saw 4 new big articles come out talking in New Yorker, New York Times, Atlantic. Everybody's talking about non-monogamy and maybe not understanding all the various ways it can happen. So I think the bigger question is just, what if we just open our minds to the fact that there's a lot of ways for people to have families and to experience intimate relationship? And from there, then you get to wrestle with the question of, do I want to? But before we even worry about that, it's just, hey, can I just take an open-minded stance about it?
Right. Yeah, because I mean, listen, it is, like you said, there's like a stigma with it. Obviously, we know a lot of people with cats. There's a stigma there, right? But I mean, even when I was reading your bio and I listened to your TEDx talk, I'm in a monogamous marriage. I have been for over 20 years. I'm happily in that. But, am I judging other people who maybe aren't living that way? Of course not, but I quite frankly don't really know them. You know what I mean? Or maybe I do, but they're not front and center, talking about it and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes I think too, just as women in a monogamous relationship, right? So you help people with their sexual relationships, even in monogamous relationships, right?
Right.
Like, what are some conversations that like lead up to these, because you're going to have a conversation in a monogamous relationship about sex, right? So like reigniting your sex life. And then how does it get to, okay, well, now should we open it up? So I kind of need to be taken down that path a little bit. So first talk to me about like, what are some conversations that help to reignite your sex life, even in a monogamous relationship?
Yeah, let's remember, polyamory doesn't guarantee a awesome, stimulating sex life, and neither does monogamy. We have to put in the effort. We just do. And so, my favorite question for reigniting sex connections, and for really, especially if you've either been with someone for a long time, I would say this is a guaranteed important question to either visit or revisit. But also, at any stage in a relationship, if you have not had this conversation, you've got something to learn. It starts with a really simple question. What is sex for you? What is sex exactly? Describe it to me. How do you know when you're having sex? How do you know when you're done? What's the goal of sex for you? So that's the beginning question there is just, what is sex for you? And the key to using this to really generate a new spark is to enter into the conversation in a spirit of total curiosity and suspending your belief that you already know what their answer is. Because I have sat in rooms full of 1,000 people and asked this question, give them an index card, have people write down the answer. Every answer will be unique. So suspend that belief that you know and ask your partner, what is sex? What is it for you? What I see is that when people enter into that conversation, oftentimes they find out that, in fact, they have sex for different reasons. They experience different things, different acts, literal different acts count, big air quotes there, they count as sex, right? So one person will say, oh, sex is when I'm heading toward an orgasm. Okay, that's one way we could describe it. Another person might say, sex is when I'm leaning into my partner and beginning to feel that juiciness and, oh, it's hard for me to put into words. And they'll start describing like, oh, I feel like I'm starting to have sex when we cross a certain line, and I'll probe a little bit more. Tell me about that line. How do you know when you've leaned over the line and you're going to have sex? Another thing to think about is what the acts are that constitute sex, those might also illustrate the edges of your current imagination of what you want or what your partner wants. But usually we develop those edges really early in our relationships, in the first few weeks, if not months, definitely, but usually weeks, we start to develop a constrained imagination about what is acceptable in this relationship. And we forget to come back and actually revisit like, oh, hey, we are growing, changing humans. Our sexual life, our sexual interiority will shift over time. What does that mean? Like, what am I going to want? And when we work in that constrained imagination, things tend to get a little stale and stagnant, especially over the course of years. So if we start having this question, one of the things that might come up is that some people have a rich fantasy life. Most people have some kind of erotic fantasy life. Some of them visualize that fantasy life, some don't. For some, they take in fantasy from the outside. But in those fantasies, Justin Lemillard, the fantastic sex researcher, he did this great study. It's written up in his book, Tell Me What You Want. He talks about what people actually want. This is like a 4,000 person study. And the number one fantasy across the board for Americans is multi-person sex. Multi-person sex,
very
right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So right in there, what if your partner says, hey, this is what sex is to me now? And then we bridge into what's fun for you? What's erotic for you? What are your fantasies? If I can make space for that, the conversation now can be about what do I want out of my erotic overlap with this partner? For me, opening up, it doesn't start with, hey, let's go to a bar and pick someone up. And it doesn't start with, let's open a Tinder profile. It starts with, let's contemplate this in our imagination. If we are currently partnered in a dyad, let's try bringing in the imaginal third before we ever go anywhere else. Because if we can't do that and we can't talk about the imaginal third, we're not going to be prepared for the embodied third. That's going to be a rock the boat moment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. So basically it starts with obviously conversation. I mean, I think that question that you posed is great because so many people probably just aren't even having, and well, probably not a lot of conversations, but even aren't getting that far in depth about their sex life and talking about it. Right. And part of the problem is probably that there's conversations just aren't even being had. Right. There's not that open communication about sex in general because life gets busy and there's this and there's that and there's the kids and there's work
and
there's
shame
and shame. Yeah. Shame. Then you're asking not only your partner, but you're also asking yourself to be vulnerable, right? To be able to share your deepest, darkest secrets, if you will, about like what is in your head, what is pleasure for you, what is, so I think all of those things, we tend to sort of avoid as humans because they're kind of hard. They're hard conversations to have because of those emotions that are linked with them, the shame, the vulnerability, the jealousy that you obviously talk about so deeply in all of your research.
Right. It's so important to remember that when we're sharing these erotic truths, our actual erotic self, that is, let's back that word out, right? Most people that I talk to, they've come to me because they want more erotic connection of some type. Back that word out a little bit. We want eros, right? EROS. Yeah. We want connection to the life force. We want to feel alive again. And a lot of times infidelity happens because someone connects with someone outside of their dyad who sparks their eros. It's not even about sex. It's about eros. It's about this, ooh, you see something in me. Esther Perel speaks to this beautifully. And sometimes we do want to literalize that. Sometimes you genuinely follow that thread and find, oh, I do want multiplicity of partners. And sometimes this is about, oh, I have allowed myself to imagine that I know my partner and that they are static and they've done the same to me. And now we're just stuck. This is just muck and mud. And there is no erotic exchange. Asking yourself, even if you're not sure you're ready to have the conversations with your partner, can you ask yourself, what is sex? the number of people who have sought out my help as a sex educator who, when I ask them, so what is sex for you? It's not just a blankness, but a panicked, oh my God, she wants me to say the words. I have to say the words out loud. And yes, we're going to say the words out loud. I'm going to ask you to talk about how you like to be touched. I'm going to ask you to talk about what pleasure feels like, not just in your body, though that's important, but also in your mind. I'm going to ask you to open up your whole being to the idea that pleasure is a full body, mind, soul experience. And you may have disconnected from that years ago. And now you're mad at your partner for not providing it, but you don't even know what it is for yourself. So that is all beautiful work that you can do even before you get to that potentially scary time of bringing this to your partner and saying, so, wow, a chat maybe? Way before that. Can I go inside?
Do you find that when working with couples, it's a process to really sort of even get them to open up about all of those things, to really for them to come forward? Because I would imagine that, it is a process of sort of opening your emotions first, and being able to become more and more comfortable about talking about it. Because I'm assuming not everyone that comes to you is just ready to just jump in, right? So it's maybe they're having issues in the relationship. They're trying to figure out what it is, but then it's a slow opening of maybe discovering for themselves what it is that they want.
Yeah. Often there is one person who's interested in some kind of change and the other person is labeled as the resistant person, right?
Gotcha.
And I like to work from the perspective that if you showed up, then this is you. You've got work to do. But frequently there's one person in the room who's like, I'm here because I was asked to be here, but I don't see a problem.
Right.
And in that case, they may not be ready for working with me because I am asking people to actively commit to a self-consent of, I'm here. I am here for myself. I am here for my own reasons. I am on an inner journey to know myself better so that I can also communicate that self to my partner. And if you're not there yet, you probably need to do some trauma work. You probably need to do some unpacking of why it is that you feel that it is your partner's responsibility to handle the relationship stuff. So when you said, is it about learning how to talk about emotions first? Not always. Sometimes people are able to talk about emotions, but they literally can't talk about their bodies. They can't say the words of sex, or they think that you should never have to. The stories we have made up about how relationships should work and how we shouldn't have to talk about them, those run deep, they're thick, and most people have been presented an image of relationship where at best we were presented a nice model of, well, that looks like it works. We still don't see the inner mechanisms. Okay, how? Why does it work? What conversations are people having that allow this to work? Thomas Moore is one of my mentors, and he said in his book, Soulmates, conversation is the sex act of the soul. Conversation is the sex act of the soul. It is not easy for everyone. My first husband really struggled with conversation. I mean, what do you do then? If someone doesn't wish to converse with you? That is a painful spot, no matter whether the conversation is about sex or about emotions or about how do we make a shift so that we both feel like there's room for us to grow. Conversing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how just not communicating is, I think, such a huge rampant problem in so many relationships. Right? I mean, friendships, relationships, family members, you name it, right? It is key to everything. So
and some of us really struggle with I can't, I don't know how to bring the words up. I mean that, when I think back to being in that first marriage, I think, this was not a failing. Like, he did not know how to bring those things forward.
Right.
And our work as a couple was to figure out how to work with who he was, not to try to label one is good and one is bad. Yeah. And that is often what's happening when people show up into an educational or therapeutic or coaching process. We've often already, diagnosed from the inside what's wrong.
Right.
And that can stop us from actually getting to the meat of the puzzle.
So let me ask you this. So what about couples or people who come to you that are just feeling like there's like a blockage as to why they can't open up? Like obviously like religion has to be one of
Sure.
them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so because, for religions that only favor monogamous relationships. So even if they have certain desires, they might be feeling guilty or they might be feeling like shameful for even feeling those feelings. So obviously religion comes to mind as the big one, but are there other reasons that
Yeah.
you see that people just feel shameful or guilty and just don't even want to discuss their erotic life or their sex life or their desires because they feel like they just quote unquote shouldn't?
Right. So let's name it. So you brought religion and named that. And I think for people who are either currently actively participating in a religion that has any hints of purity culture attached to it, or any hints of demonizing or shaming or labeling something a sin because it is sexual or erotic, if you're actively participating, you may know, like, oh, I am actively participating in this. So of course I have some stuff. I've got issues, you might say.
Yeah.
Where I think it's actually a bigger challenge is when people are like, oh, I was raised that way, but I'm not now. Or, yeah, I wasn't really raised with any religion, except when you really delve into their story, you realize they carried it anyways. They took the cultural milieu and they internalized those messages. And even though no one ever said, you have to do this or you'll go to hell, you have to behave this way, they still took it all on. It's the puritanical imagination. All of America operates, with this basis of the settlers who came here, right? They colonized this culture and they brought with them this puritanical basis that says pleasure is inherently bad. I see that bubble up in my clients all the time where they have no lived experience of like being told this was bad or this was sinful, but they still feel it from the inside. They feel it every day and it's overwhelming. So unpacking that is big work. Luckily, you actually don't need your partner's buy-in to do that work. So even if you're currently in a relationship situation where you're not thrilled with how things are going, if there's even a hint of sexual shame or that puritanical attitude or that confusion about like, I don't even know how to say the words. Great. You've got work you can do for yourself on your own. And the other thing that can happen is if you had any sexual trauma, well, you may have now tamped a lot of stuff down. So you might need to specifically seek out some support around dealing with the trauma and how it's stored in your body and how it's stored in your memory so that you can have these conversations. Usually when people show up and say, oh, we just don't, we're struggling with communication. Cool. I wish that was a diagnostic, but it's just not. Everyone needs communication work because we're, talking to other people. It's really complicated.
Yeah.
But not all of us have the same inner workings. And a lot of us have great big blocks, whether those are religious or cultural, or whether they're trauma related. We have these big blocks in our way that stop us from being able to freely experience ourselves as sexual beings and then freely sharing that with the people that we wish to partner with. That's big work to do. And it's really exciting, but you have to open yourself up to it.
Okay. Yeah, I would think that it is very big work to do for all of that. So then moving towards just being in open relationship, you talk about whether it's an open marriage or open relationships, whatever it is, how to do it happily, ethically, respectfully. So talk to us about that. Like, what does that look like?
Well, it can look like so many different things. In my own life, I have an anchor partner who I'm married to. We've been together for 15 years. We have what looks on the outside like a pretty standard marriage, but we both have other partners and we both experience ourselves as polyamorous from the inside out. That's one way it might look. There are other people, though, who limit their non-monogamy in certain ways. Maybe they only date in other areas. Maybe they don't date in their home area. Or there are other people who have families that are very interesting. We might call them a polycule. They live all together, multiple adults raising families together, or multiple adults sharing the responsibilities of a household. Then there are people who might attend swingers parties, go to play parties, or have friends with benefits who they're like, yeah, this works for us. There are so many ways it could work. And when people say, I have an open marriage or I have an open relationship, my next question has to be, tell me about yours, because yours is going to be unique from everybody else's. And even if you use a specific language, that doesn't mean it will line up with somebody else's. And the thing that often people are looking for is, well, how do I do this well? But they miss the step where they decide to engage fully in all of their relating, right? What I do, so I work with people to make the transition from, okay, we've only done monogamy, or I've only done monogamy, but I know I want to do something that is more elaborate than that and is more complex in the fact that there are multiple people involved. Okay, what do? I need to shore up my ability to relate. I need to deal with the fact that I was not given relational skills. Instead, most of us just grew up and started having relationships. Did we get a relational education? What I do comprehensive relationship education. I ask people to stay with me for a minimum of a year because it takes time to not only learn new tools, but then practice them. And most of us we're not fully prepared for the fact that just because our relationship has been going along and even may feel good, we may need a lot more tools, especially if we want to have that conversation about, so I think I want to have other partners, or I think I want to explore sexually outside, or you know what? I want my friendships to deepen and not feel limited by this idea of emotional affairs. I want my friendships to be able to go as deeply as they go and not have it labeled as inherently bad. Any of those might be the reason. And that's a big conversation to have. And it's always going to result, in my experience, in the need to gain new skills so that we can have those conversations without spiraling into shame or just reverting into old patterns, doing what we've always done.
And then I know that you talk a lot about jealousy, because a lot of your research is based on jealousy. And, of course, in a monogamous relationship, there could be jealousy as well. But how do you deal with that when you're talking about multiple partners? I mean, I would think that it's a little bit more prevalent, something that's more on the forefront, especially in the beginning. What is jealousy and how does it relate into this polyamorous world?
Yeah. So, I think most people, their response when they hear about non-monogamy as a practice, as something you would choose to do, for the long haul, most people's reaction is either, whoa, tell me more, or, oh, I could never do that, I'm too jealous, or I would never want that. It's too much jealousy. But monogamy doesn't protect us from jealousy. It simply allows us to go for periods of time where we may not experience it because we are currently feeling safe and we're not feeling any threat. But some people experience jealousy inside monogamy every single day, even if there is no objective threat. So jealousy itself is a threat detection system. It is a protective emotion designed to alert you to the fact that there is some kind of interruption, some person interrupting or threatening to interrupt your valued connection. So there's a triangle in jealousy. There's myself, my beloved, and the perceived interrupter. And when you introduce the idea of multiple partners, you are opening the door to the reality that there will be triangles. We know there will be, like we're saying. So we go from there might be, or they might jump out of nowhere, to, nope, we're going to do this. So actually, in a way, there can be a more proactive approach to jealousy. And this is what I have found over and over again is non-monogamous people have an expectation that they're going to have to work with their jealousy. So they typically have developed some tools for it. And they expect it to show up. So they don't get that like tidal wave knocking them over. Instead, they get the tidal wave and they're like, I'm going to need a surfboard. I'm going to need something here. This is going to be a lot. And it sounds small, but when you're in it, there's a big difference there. The other thing that's different is jealousy in non-monogamous relationships isn't seen as inherently bad, because just because you're feeling jealousy doesn't mean that anything's wrong. Whereas in monogamy, right, the premise of monogamy is that if jealousy shows up, something's wrong. It means either somebody's behaving badly or somebody's, I'm going to use big air quotes again, crazy, and they're too insecure, right? So it's a different imagination of what jealousy is. I like to back out from jealousy and just say, it's just information. Now, what do I do with it? And it is not the easiest emotional experience to deal with. Let's be real, it begets a lot of violence too. 74% of domestic violence cases in the United States in a recent study were shown to have listed some form of jealousy in the write-up of them.
Wow.
Jealousy can make for violent situations. So I think we need to be having a much broader conversation, because I don't think those were all non-monogamous people, by the way.
Yeah.
It goes without saying, the domestic violence reports are slanted the same way the rest of life is, which is to say vastly monogamous. So we need to be having a larger conversation about, what do we do when jealousy comes up? Do we point our fingers? Do we blame our partners? Do we get angry? Do we feel entitled to feel rageful or violent? How do we talk about jealousy so that we understand that, just like when I get sad, I might have big feelings and I need to sit with those and I need to learn how to process them and what tools to use with it. Jealousy is a big feeling. I need to have tools with it. And I have had thousands of conversations. I'll ask you this right now. Did your parents sit you down and teach you about how to deal with jealousy?
No.
Right. I've never had anybody say yes. Did you ever experience any other emotional teaching? Did anyone help you work through anger or sadness when it came up?
Yeah, I will say that I did have a very close relationship with my mom. And so, she unfortunately died young, but I did have her for 20 years. So we communicated about a lot of very deep things. And I think she did help me with a lot of big emotions. So I was lucky there. I think that's probably why I do what I do, because just as you're talking and we're talking about jealousy and talking about big emotions in general, I do believe that if we as human beings can tap into understanding why we feel a certain way, or understanding that, we're all just made up of all these little cells that create all these thoughts, which create emotions, which creates behavior, which lends into our results. But it's all about our emotions. And so many times we have to stop and really understand why we feel the way we do, how one thought coming into your head. I mean, how many times do you get a thought that comes into your head and all of a sudden your stomach drops and you go beet red, and you can be angry in an instant. You can be jealous in an instant, right? Because as human beings, that's how we're wired with these emotions. Right. So I agree with everything that you're saying, and believe that as human beings, we have to learn how to channel, how to understand, how to relate, how to really deal with all of these big emotions, and jealousy being one of them.
Right. And when you take those steps, like to sit with a big emotion, what I find is a lot of people imagine that jealousy is different from those other big emotions. But when you look at jealousy is described as a complex emotion, which means it's bringing a whole bunch of other emotional content forward. So I like to describe jealousy as coming in flavors. So let's say you have a big well up of jealousy. Okay, is it sad toned? Is it anger toned? Does it feel like grief or anticipatory grief? Or do you feel shameful for even feeling jealous? Because plenty of us feel shameful when jealousy comes up.
Yeah.
So whatever else you're feeling, or do you feel envious? Do you feel envious of the person you perceive as interrupting your connection? You're like, they're prettier than me. They've got more money than me, whatever it is. They're more powerful, whatever you're feeling, all those other emotions, those tend to be a little bit more acceptable. And so often people will say, I don't feel jealous. I just feel this other thing. But if you're experiencing a sense of threat, real or imagined, to your relational connection there by a third party, then what you're experiencing is jealousy. And you're going to work with it better if you can be with the emotion, but also recognize that it is complex and it's going to have all of these layers to peel apart. And if you do that, you're going to need more time to be with it. We try to rush through jealousy and we ask other people to fix it for us. And that doesn't work. But boy, we really get intent about it. I mean, watch absolutely any reality show. You're going to see jealousy pop up. What do people do? Have you ever seen someone? I know this would not make great television, although it would be great television. Imagine if somebody felt jealous on a reality TV show and they were like, That is a big feeling. I think I'm going to go
Yeah.
sit with that for a bit. They don't. Instead, they throw a hissy fit or they blame
Right.
someone or they throw someone in the pool, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what happens. And I think we're actually beginning to have this conversation at the same time that we're being exposed to poor experiences of jealousy played out in front of our eyes. And it didn't start with us. I mean, Hera wasn't handling her jealousy well either. And those stories are thousands of years old, right? She's
Right.
turning people into cows, she's blowing them up. She's never saying, Zeus, get your act together.
Right.
We are a couple, and I did not agree to this. And that would be the move. Ideally, in jealousy, the move would be to work with my own emotions, work with my narrative of jealousy. And then step 4 is turning to my partner and saying, I need to work with you on this. My needs are not being met. I am feeling a lack of boundaries or a misunderstanding or lack of agreements or whatever. But that's step 4. First, I've got to notice it, name it, work with my own narrative, and then I can navigate my needs. Really important to work through it in that order.
Wow, Joli, amazing. I mean, honestly, thank you so much for sharing not only your expertise today, but, for opening up a conversation about something that I think is, really a tough topic to talk about. I think sex in general, relationships in general, for monogamous couples is a difficult subject to talk about. And you're taking it a step further and really talking about, maybe doing something that ultimately is going to bring you more joy, more happiness, more love in your life. So I just want to thank you very much for having this conversation, all that you do, and for your expertise on it and sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. Thanks for entertaining this off the beaten path conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today on another episode of Suburban Warrior. If you want to learn more about Joli, look at her book. We're going to have her website, all of her socials. We're going to have them all linked in the show notes. So be sure to check her out. And thank you so much for joining us today on this episode. We'll be back next week with another amazing Suburban Warrior story for you. And don't forget to follow me on Suburban Warrior on Instagram and TikTok. And we will see you next week. Thanks so much.